This is a podcast from Partnerships for Wellbeing.
Hello and welcome to episode 20 of Raised to Wellbeing, coming to you from Partnerships for Wellbeing here in Inverness. My guest this time around has many strings to his bow. He's a writer, a poet, a musician, a biker, a whiskey connoisseur, a man who knows a wee bit about religion, and more lately, a politician. He lives in Shetland, which might give you a clue who I'm talking about, but he also knows this neck of the woods in Inverness very well. Tom Morton, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, when you kindly accepted the invitation to appear in the podcast, I said we could talk about life, death, books, alcohol, motorbikes, push bikes, religion. Where would you like to begin?
Well, I think I'd probably like to begin with motorbikes in that I am now an ex-biker. As of maybe 3 months ago, I handed in my helmet, or you don't actually hand in your helmet. There's not a sort of police amnesty or anything like that for ex-bikers, but I sold all my motorbike stuff, and I'd already sold my motorbike. Partly it was an age thing and partly continual nagging from my wife, Susan, who basically felt that I was an unsafe motorcyclist. And I think there's some truth in that for elderly people like me who, occasionally take their motorbike out on a sunny day and basically put themselves and everybody else at risk. So that's what's happened. I'm an ex-biker, but I have drawn inspiration from you, Jeff, and I have bought a convertible car.
Well, I've gone the other way and I've got rid of my convertible car and I've got an electric bike. So,
well, I must admit the whole idea of a convertible car is something that had escaped me for years and years since I worked in the TV program Wheel Nuts. And that was the last time I ever drove an Audi TT Roadster. I'd forgotten how cold your head gets.
Yes, you can put the heater on, though. I mean,
that's true.
It's an enormous waste of energy, but yes, you can do that.
Put your heater on and wear a hat.
Yeah. See, I always maintained the argument that although people said it's silly to have a convertible in this climate, actually it's the ideal climate, because if you have one in Spain, it's far too hot and you just fry. So that was always my excuse. Now, you say you've given up motorbiking. You said that before, haven't you? I've
said that on various occasions, yes. And the other thing is, talking of electric bikes, I mean, electric motorcycles. Now, there's a thing, because you can get grants or loans, interest-free loans from the Scottish government to buy these. And, a wee electric motorcycle. Why am I talking myself into this? It's probably because my wife can't hear me. But, an electric motorbike would be good. I mean, what a symbol that would be of environmental friendliness. Yeah,
but surely a nursery slope back into full-blown motorbikes again, probably.
Possibly. One of the things that's always irritated me about motorcycles is the gear that you have to wear. You have to get into leather trousers. I mean, some people maybe find that quite exciting, wearing leather trousers, but I always found it a pain. And jackets and scarves and all sorts of gubbins like that. At least with a convertible car, you can wear your normal clothes.
Okay, Tom, so you've given that up for the moment, we'll say. But when I went through that list of your the strings to your bow, as it were, it occurred to me that maybe every couple of years, every 3 years, you embark on some new kind of life adventure. And I think the only constant that I can pinpoint for you is living in Shetland, which you made that decision decades ago and you've stuck with it.
Yeah, I can remember when you were head of Radio Scotland having lots of meetings with you when I would say, oh yeah, another 2 years and we'll be moving back to Glasgow, or another 4 years, or give it 6 months and we'll be, but for some reason, Shetland has retained its hold. And now the kids are all grown up and they've moved away. And to be honest, I would say we've probably got another 2 years or so. It's really down to Susan's job. Susan, my wife, is a GP. And her practice here in the North Mainland of Shetland is one of only 2 that are still independently run, that aren't basically under the authority of the health board. So for her, I think it's getting to the point where she's reaching the age where she feels she ought to retire, but she wants to make sure that there's continuity of service here. And I think, quite rightly, she feels that she owes a great deal to the local community and she doesn't want to let them down. So once a new doctor's in place, who knows?
You've no shortage of doctors in your family, though.
That's right. It can be a bit embarrassing to count them all up. In fact, sometimes I lose count. I think there's 6. And of my children, let me see, Martha's a doctor, Sandy's a doctor, James is a doctor, their wives are doctors. I can't remember, it's loads anyway.
Let's talk about books now, because since we last had any kind of chat, you've published quite a few more books. Your most recent deals with alcohol and religion.
Yeah, this was something that came from the editor I was working with in my previous book, which was called It Tolls for Thee, and it was about death, really, and my life or my work as a funeral celebrant. So we were thinking of just throwing around ideas, and I had thought that there might be something about alcohol, because, as you know, Jeff, I've been interested in alcohol for a fairly long time. And
me both, yeah.
And also my background in religion was something that maybe I thought we could tie together. So it struck me that alcohol has been part of religion and crucial to it, religious practice in various ways, from the obvious things like communion and communion wine to the fact that a lot of religious communities produce alcohol as monasteries, Trappist monks, some nuns, abbeys. Partly it's rooted in the whole notion of Christian settlement as arising out of agricultural development, and topsy-turvy Christian settlements producing lots and lots of advancements in the way that agriculture works.
Yes, I saw a video clip of you trying the famous Buckfast tonic wine, in which you approached it in the way a connoisseur might approach some kind of vintage red wine. You weren't too impressed.
Didn't go too well. Yeah, there's a whole chapter in the book about Buckfast. It's a very interesting substance, Buckfast tonic wine. You'll know, being from the west of Scotland, that tonic wine is part of the culture, working class culture, really, in the west of Scotland. Electric soup. And it's something, I think, because initially it's cheap. It was cheap and strong. And what you have in Buckfast is a really interesting combination of very strong alcohol, sugar, and caffeine. So it's an interesting concoction, which, as they call it in certain parts of Glasgow, wreck the hoose juice. But it's produced by this monastery down in Devon. 13 monks live there. It's one of the wealthiest religious communities in the country, if not in Europe. And they adamantly refuse to take responsibility for the fact that this stuff causes so much damage, which I find almost mystifying. They claim to be able to spend a lot of their money on charitable works and all the rest of it. But, when you go to somewhere like Wishaw Coatbridge and you see the damage that's done and the fact that there's green shards of broken Buckfast bottles in the street on a Saturday night, you really do wonder.
Well, you could make the same accusation against the Scotch whisky industry if you wanted to, in terms of it's got this kind of aura of luxury, the connoisseur, the malt brands, all of that. But it's still alcohol when it comes down to it.
It's still alcohol, but I think, the point that you're making about connoisseurship and luxury is very different from the marketing of Buckfast. I mean, Buckfast is not marketed as a luxury product. It's not marketed as something for connoisseurs. It is, Cumbernauld rocket fuel thing. I mean, there's nothing, but you wouldn't serve Buckfast at your dinner party, would you? Say, oh, I've got a very nice vintage of Buckfast. I believe it's the 2003. My goodness.
It would be quite interesting to try that and see if anybody noticed.
Well, I haven't got them with me just now, but I do have, I sent away for these sweeties called Buckfast Bors, which are made in Edinburgh, which are meant to taste of Buckfast. And in actual fact, believe it or not, it's a kind of Edinburgh rock, but flavoured with Buckfast.
Well, mentioned briefly whiskey, and we've mentioned briefly your previous book, It Tolls for Thee. Now, I saw you on Facebook one afternoon and you were recommending a lovely bottle of whiskey from the co-op, I believe, and you were saying what good value it was, what a great taste. And I rushed out and I bought some, and sure enough, you were right. It was a lovely whiskey. And next time I heard from you on Facebook, you were coming out of hospital.
Well, let me think. When I left Radio Scotland, that was skin cancer, I think, which provoked that. And then, fortunately, I've been in remission from that ever since, from Radio Scotland and from skin cancer. But there was also 2 heart attacks, and that was really a salutary business. I don't think the alcohol was a huge factor in that. A West of Scotland diet, on the other hand, my granny in Bellshill in Lanarkshire was very fond of serving up pies and heavily sugared, heavily fatted sweets. And my whole childhood was wrapped up in food, fish suppers, chips, pies, all of that kind of thing. So I don't think there's any question that there was a link, but also a genetic one, because I come from a family on one side where all the males died at age 50 or younger from heart failure. And so, that was what was the prime reason for my my hospital stays. And I think the second time I had 2 bouts of heart problems, and the second time I was there, which was, I think, about 3 or 4 years ago, down in Aberdeen, which was quite exciting, because in Shetland, in this kind of situation, it was air ambulance and evacuation and all that kind of thing. They put in 2 stents in quite a brave and difficult way of doing it, and that seems to have sorted out the problem. I'm still partial to a bit of cheese and chips, though, unfortunately.
Well, I'm glad you recovered. That's the main thing.
Well, of course, the good thing is that whiskey is one of the things that dilates the arteries and, increases the blood flow, Jeff. So, in moderation, a small whiskey is actually not a bad thing.
Can you just assure me you're not under any kind of payment from the Scotch whisky industry at this point?
No.
At this point.
No, and I'm sure my accountant would agree with that. There was one period when I did Spirit of Adventure, and there was a couple of years when I was writing and broadcasting only about whiskey, and I was claiming whiskey against tax, much to my accountant's amusement and approval, it must be said. But that is no longer the case.
Now, death. Let's talk about death, because your book, as I say, your previous book, it told for that emerged from your shall we call it your previous life adventure as a civil celebrant, is that right?
Humanist celebrant initially, secular celebrant, and then basically it got to the stage where people were asking me to do religious services as well, and I was going, well, why not? Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Do you know, this interesting thing about our attitude to death these days, and I've got a theory that one of the great things that has happened is those terrible adverts you get in daytime television for funeral plans, because there was a time when they weren't allowed on television, and now every day there's somebody talking about, making sure you're prepared for your death and your family aren't going to have big expenses and all that. And it really brings home to people, hey, you are going to snuff it one day, so you better get your act together.
Well, there is that. It was odd. I think where it really struck me was during this year's, or the last Tour de France, there were continual adverts for cheapo, non-attended funerals. This is when you basically, it's £900. It's the cheapest possible funeral, and there's no service. Basically, you just get, and you've got somebody standing there going, I don't want to cause my family any trouble. This will be fine. And it's only £900. What a relief. I'm going to spend the rest of my money on drink and drugs. But yeah, I think it's important for people to realize that when they die, they have no rights. The dead have no rights. It's the people who are left behind who organize the funeral, who organize all the aspects of dealing, all the logistics of death. Yeah. But it's them that have to suffer. It's the bereaved and the grieving who have all that trauma to go through. And I think acknowledging that and making it easy for them maybe giving them some ideas, telling them what you would like is a really useful thing. And I think we also have to acknowledge that it's not enough, really, in my opinion, to just say, oh, I don't want anything. I just want nothing. Just have a drink at the local pub. Because people have to go through a process of grieving, and the rituals of bereavement and grief are important.
And what about you, Tom? Have you made plans? I mean, I know you've picked out your plot.
That's right. Well, Susan and I went up to the cemetery in Aishnes, which is one of our favourite places. It's on the peninsula north of where we live in Shetland. And we have bought our plot. It's a double plot. And it is in a spectacularly beautiful place. I suppose it's comforting for us to know that is where our remains will be. Not that we'll know anything about it at the time. And of course, it may make it very inconvenient for our family indeed. If, for example, we happen to die while on holiday in Tenerife or something like that.
Yeah.
But there we go. Yeah. And also there's a chapter in the book about what I would like to happen or have said. In fact, I wrote my own eulogy, which I recommend to everyone.
Of course you did.
In fact, I thought of recording my own eulogy. That would be an interesting one. But I think hearing the dead person's voice, at a funeral would be a bit freaky.
Yeah. Whoa.
I have had one or two sort of strange experiences conducting funerals. I think one of the most embarrassing was when, during the pandemic, when it was all graveside services, and I was using Bluetoothed music from my phone with a Bluetooth speaker at the request of the family to play some Hank Williams songs at the graveside. And it was a solemn, Hank Williams songs which was being played. Well, unfortunately, it went straight into Jambalaya. And also when the music started, it was coming from the Bluetooth speaker, which was behind a gravestone. And one of the elderly relatives nearly jumped out of her skin, it must be said, when it sort of burst into life.
Well, I have to say that the saddest but best funeral I've been to lately was a friend of mine died a few months ago, and she had requested I'm in the Mood for Dancing to be played. And it was just wonderful to see the mixed reaction from those who did get up and dance and those who didn't know what to do with themselves. It's a great
tricky
practical joke you can play on people, isn't it? It's a great. You've got one final trick up your sleeve. Yeah.
Well, that's right. John Cooper Clarke poems read by John Cooper Clarke is another one. The swearing can cause all kinds of issues. But yeah, anything goes at a funeral, though obviously there may be restrictions in certain churches over what you can do.
Absolutely. Well, it takes us nicely. Having talked about death, let's talk about life after death and religion, because I've never been quite sure what your relationship is to organized religion, Tom. And I know recently you were back in some of your childhood haunts, and that's where you were part of the Brethren, I believe, in Ayrshire. Has that tainted you or helped you in your life?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. I would say that, in lots of ways, it was an incredibly valuable upbringing. I don't think I'd be doing what I've done in terms of public performance or broadcasting or writing if I hadn't been encouraged within the Gospel Hall as such to perform, because it was very much about proclaiming the gospel, and the only way to achieve anything within the Brethren circles was to become a preacher or a performer of some kind. However, it's also been damaging in lots of ways, I would say, emotionally. It's a very restrictive morality. But on the other hand, I think that the way I regard religion now is as a series of stories which can be beneficial, it can be damaging, it can be useful. And I think one of the great privileges of adulthood, of old age, is being able to, with some distance, look at your upbringing and say, well, these are the good things, and those are the good things I'm going to use now. And those are the bad things, and I'm just not going to have anything to do with that anymore. And I'm not going to let these things affect my life.
Okay. Now, this is Ways to Wellbeing, so I should ask you about your current lifestyle and how you keep yourself fit and healthy, apart from not going in for the big fry-up breakfasts every day. Are you a walker, a jogger, a cyclist? What are you?
Well, like you, I have an electric bike. I feel vaguely guilty about an electric bike. You know, there's something about not suffering. Maybe this is a religious background thing coming out, you know, that you feel you ought to suffering up the hill rather than zooming past some hapless, you know, serious cyclist who can't get up the hill.
Yes.
But on the other hand, it does feel good too. Yeah, cycling is a problem in Shetland at certain times of the year. This time of year, you can have lovely days, but very short, lovely days because we're so far north. And it can be terribly windy for days, weeks on end. So you wouldn't want to go on your bike then. In the summer, we go kayaking. We live right on the sea. So that's very enjoyable. Walking is a funny one because I enjoy walking in cities and in towns more than I enjoy walking in the countryside somehow. Yeah. I love walking in Glasgow. I just love it.
Especially this time of the year when people leave their windows open and their lights are blazing away, you can peer inside. Or is that just me?
No, I thought you were going to say people leave their windows open and you can sneak in and steal stuff. But that's
what Buckfast will do.
Let's not talk about that. Yes. No, you're absolutely right. There is something. I mean, when we were in Glasgow, we were like Hicks from the Sticks just last week, and we were saying, "Oh, look, there's a Christmas tree," and couldn't go over the fact that it was so early in the year and there were all these Christmas trees and Christmas lights and stuff. But yeah, there is something wonderful, though it can be a bit odd. Like we have a wee flat in Troon now in Ayrshire, and so rather than going straight to the city or having a flat in the city, we tend to, you know, have this decompression in a small seaside town. Then we get the train up to Glasgow and suddenly you're in amongst all these thousands of people and you go in the underground and you think, should I be wearing a mask? Nobody's wearing a mask. Why aren't people wearing masks? All this kind of thing.
Anyway, let's return to books again, Tom, because I'm intrigued to ask you if you've got another book in the pipeline, because you've recently become a counsellor. A local counsellor. So are you observing and taking notes? And is that your next book?
A book about being in the council. I think there's an awful lot happening in Shetland at the moment. We have a very interesting scenario playing out on the island of Unst, the most northerly island, where millions, more than 20 million quid so far has been invested in a space centre where they're going to be launching rockets and satellites, and it's all defence orientated. Lockheed Martin, the biggest arms company in the world, are involved. But I mean, the idea of all these scientists and soldiers and military people and spooks arriving in an island like Unst and setting up a rocket launching scenario. I think there's got to be a book in that. I think that could be great.
It's got to be a thriller.
Yeah. I've also, it's an interesting thing. I've written a couple of thrillers and had them published, but I've never been very happy with them. And I've never felt I've got on top of that as a genre. So I've recently enrolled in, you know, BBC have this thing called Maestro. It's a kind of course.
Yes.
So I've recently decided to enroll in the Lee Child course in how to write thrillers. So I'm hoping that will help me along.
Yeah, James Patterson is also on doing one of these as well, which I thought was very good. But of course, he now licenses out his name and other people write his books for him.
That's right. He's got, but so does Lee Child. I think Lee Child has his brother doing it.
That's right. It's his brother, yes. Yeah. It's interesting, Tom, where do you fit into the literary scene in Scotland? Because I think you are one of the most talented, gifted writers in Scotland at the moment, and you can write across so many genres as well. But whenever these lists come out or festivals come out, your name doesn't come kind of front of mind there. You know, do you keep your distance from that world?
Nobody ever asks me.
You're too far away.
I suppose there is partly the geographical thing, but also it's an odd one. I just found, I think maybe I've been a bit too prolific and a bit too visible and a bit too obviously, you know, high profile in broadcasting. One of the interesting things about being on the radio for so long and was that people kind of put you in that little niche, and they don't necessarily like the idea that you could do, 2 or 3 other things as well. So there's that. Possibly I've been around too long, Jeff, Possibly people are sick of me.
Well, Tom, I hope you're around a wee bit longer, and I hope people do come and find all your books, because I've read about, I don't know how many you've written, but I'm sure I've read about 6 or 7 of them, and they're all very different in their style, content, and what they're trying to achieve, but they're all brilliant in their own way.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate that. That's, and it's particularly meaningful coming from you, who has played such an important part in my life and my career. So there you are.
Yes, I'm just your Buckfast dealer. That's all I am.
I will send you a bottle of vintage Buckfast.
Tom Morton, thank you very much.
Ways to Wellbeing is produced in Inverness, Scotland by Partnerships for Wellbeing, a registered charity. To find out more about our services, go to p4w.org.uk.